Ah, look who just caused an emergency meeting. Not because you shouted, not because you threatened, not because you demanded attention, but because you existed in a way that could no longer be ignored. Somewhere, symbolically, quietly, people were forced to stop, look at each other, and admit something they'd been avoiding, that the version of you they thought they understood no longer fits, that the story they told themselves about you is outdated, that whatever they assumed would keep you manageable didn't work. You didn't storm the gates. You didn't flip the table. You stayed calm. And that's what unsettled them, because systems, social ones, psychological ones, inherited expectations, are built to handle noise. They know how to respond to anger, rebellion, drama. They've rehearsed those responses for generations, but they are clumsy when faced with quiet endurance. They don't know what to do with someone who absorbs pressure and becomes clearer instead of smaller. That's you. You were underestimated because your strength didn't announce itself. It didn't come wrapped in spectacle or ego. It showed up as patience, as pattern recognition, as an ability to survive moments that were meant to break you. At first, they didn't see it. They assumed you were ordinary, assumed you were adaptable, assumed you would bend the way others did. And for a while, you let them believe that, not out of fear, but because you were still learning the shape of yourself, still discovering what lived beneath the surface, what had been passed down not as stories, but as instincts. Every family carried not wealth, not status, but memory, ways of responding to pressure, ways of standing back up after loss, ways of seeing danger before it announces itself. You carry that kind of inheritance, not something mystical, something practical, a resilience learned through repetition, a calm forged by necessity, an awareness shaped by history rather than comfort. And someone noticed, someone who has seen patterns repeat, someone who understands that endurance leaves signatures. They recognize the signs not because of what you said, but because of what didn't break you, because of how you moved forward when retreat would have been easier, because of the way you didn't become bitter when bitterness would have been justified. That person didn't warn others out of fear of you. They warned them out of respect for consequences. Because history teaches one lesson over and over. When you apply pressure to the wrong kind of person, you don't get submission, you get activation. Pressure doesn't always crush. Sometimes it clarifies, and you clarified. What unsettled them wasn't your ambition. It wasn't your confidence. It was the realization that your strength didn't depend on their approval, that you weren't playing the same game, that you didn't measure success the way they expected. You weren't trying to win their system. You were outgrowing it. That's when conversations changed, not openly, but subtly. Plans were reconsidered. Assumptions questioned. Someone finally said the quiet part out loud. Maybe pushing you further wouldn't end the way they thought, because you don't collapse under pressure. You reorganize. Every setback sharpened you. Every betrayal taught you timing. Every delay taught you patience. You learned when to move and when to wait, when to speak and when silence would do more work. You learned that reacting gives power away, but observing builds it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance shifted. Not in your posture. In the room, people started sensing that whatever they tried before no longer landed. That influence slipped, that leverage evaporated. You weren't resisting them. You were simply no longer available to be moved by them. That's when the metaphorical warning was issued. Not because you were dangerous, but because you were inevitable. There's a difference. Danger is loud. Inevitability is quiet. It doesn't threaten, it arrives. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need justice delivered theatrically. You needed time, Time to integrate what you'd learned. Time to stop apologizing for your resilience. Time to recognize that what you carry forward isn't anger. It's memory of how to endure, memory of how to rebuild, memory of how to remain intact when others fracture. They thought they were dealing with a person. They weren't, they were dealing with a pattern that's survived before. And patterns don't argue. They repeat until the lesson is learned. You didn't escalate. You didn't retaliate. You kept building, and that's what triggered the emergency meeting. The realization that whatever they tried to control had moved beyond their reach, not by force, but by growth, that the more they applied pressure, the more you aligned with yourself, that every attempt to diminish you only made your direction clearer. They weren't afraid of what you'd do. They were afraid of what would happen naturally if they kept going. Because when someone operates from inherited resilience, when they stop doubting it, stop hiding it, stop shrinking to fit expectations, consequences stop needing an enforcer. Things simply fall apart on their own. Plans lose coherence, alliances weaken. Confidence drains. Not because you caused it deliberately, but because systems built on manipulation don't survive contact with someone who can't be manipulated. You've felt this shift, haven't you? The way people hesitate now, the way conversations soften, the way opposition feels less certain. That's not dominance, that's gravity. You don't pull people toward you by force. They adjust around you because your center holds. And here's the truth. They're circling but can't quite say, you don't need permission anymore. Not to grow, not to lead your own life, not to carry what was passed down to you. You are the continuation of something that learned how to survive without applause. And now that you've stopped pretending otherwise, now that you've stopped playing small, the world around you has to update its understanding. That update feels like panic to those invested in the old story. To you, it feels like clarity. You're not done. This wasn't the end of the pressure. It was the moment it stopped working. And what comes next won't be loud. It will be steady. It will be undeniable. And once that realization settles in, everything around you starts to move differently. Not faster, not louder, more carefully, because the people who once felt comfortable underestimating you now feel the ground shifting beneath their assumptions. The emergency meeting wasn't about strategy. It wasn't about counter moves. It was about recognition, the kind that arrives late and changes the tone of every conversation that follows. They begin replaying the past, moments they dismissed, reactions they misread, silences they mistook for weakness. They notice patterns they ignored before. How you never rushed, how you absorbed pressure without broadcasting pain, how setbacks never seemed to harden you, only sharpen you, and slowly the story they told themselves stops holding together. You weren't lucky, you weren't naïve, you weren't surviving by accident, you were enduring by design. That's the uncomfortable truth they're circling now, not because you announced it, but because outcomes keep pointing in the same direction. Every attempt to slow you down ended up rerouting you somewhere stronger. Every obstacle meant to corner you forced you to develop skills they never saw coming. You didn't break the system. You exposed its blind spots, and blind spots are terrifying to those who rely on control. What really unsettles them isn't what you might do next. It's the realization that you don't need to do anything at all, that your growth doesn't require confrontation, that your presence alone reshapes the environment simply by refusing to conform to its limitations. They start asking different questions now. Not how do we stop them, but why doesn't anything work anymore? Because manipulation depends on predictability, and you've become unpredictable in the calmest possible way. You no longer respond from habit. You respond from awareness. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. You notice it in yourself first, the way your thoughts feel less cluttered, the way decisions arrive with clarity instead of anxiety, the way your body no longer braces for impact the way it used to. You're not waiting for permission anymore. You're not rehearsing explanations in your head. You've stopped trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. And that internal shift radiates outward. People sense it before they can name it. They become more cautious around you, not because you're intimidating, but because you're grounded. Grounded people are hard to move, hard to provoke, hard to manipulate. You don't mirror chaos back at them. You don't absorb it. You let it reveal itself, and chaos hates being seen clearly. This is where the idea of lineage truly matters, not as something mystical, not as a story of superiority, but as continuity. You carry forward the lessons of those who learned to survive without guarantees, those who adapted because they had to, those who understood that endurance isn't passive. It's strategic. That inheritance shows up in how you conserve energy, in how you wait for the right moment instead of forcing outcomes, in how you choose long-term stability over short-term validation. You don't need to dominate a room to lead it. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You let time do the talking. And time, when paired with consistency, is ruthless. The people who once felt secure in their influence begin to feel exposed. Not attacked, exposed. Their tactics look obvious now. Their pressure feels transparent. Their confidence sounds rehearsed. You see it, they feel it, and still you don't react, because reaction would only anchor you back into their frame. Instead, you keep moving forward, building, learning, refining, quietly aligning your actions with who you've become, instead of who you were expected to be. Opportunities begin to appear that weren't available before. Not because the world suddenly became generous, but because you're now able to see them. Your perception widened when you stopped wasting energy on defense. You start noticing how often people try to control outcomes instead of preparing for them, how they confuse activity with progress, how they mistake urgency for importance. You don't judge it. You've been there, but you're not there anymore. And that distance creates perspective. The emergency meeting, the warnings, the hushed conversations. They weren't about stopping you. They were about recalibrating expectations, about accepting that the version of you they could manage no longer exists. You've crossed a threshold, not into power over others, into power over yourself. That's the kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It doesn't seek witnesses. It simply holds, and holding is stronger than pushing. You notice now that when challenges arise, you don't rush to label them as threats. You treat them as information. Data points. Feedback. You ask, what is this showing me? Instead of, why is this happening to me? That single shift keeps you ahead. Because while others are reacting emotionally, you're adjusting strategically. While others are scrambling to preserve image, you're reinforcing structure. You're no longer interested in winning arguments. You're interested in building something that lasts. And that's when the final realization lands, not with drama, but with weight. You don't need to prove your resilience. It's already documented in outcomes. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth. It's already embedded in how you move. You don't need revenge. Because growth has already carried you beyond the reach of those who tried to diminish you. The emergency meeting was never about fear of you. It was about fear of irrelevance, fear that the methods they relied on no longer work, fear that the frameworks they trusted are outdated. Fear that someone who refuses to break quietly exposes how fragile their control always was, and you. You're not waiting for their realization. You're already living beyond it. You carry yourself with a different gravity now, not heavier, clearer. You speak less, but when you do, it lands. You listen more, but you don't absorb what isn't yours. You've learned the difference between noise and signal, between pressure and direction, between reaction and response, and that learning compounds. This is the part they can't replicate, the part that doesn't come from strategy or training, the part that's earned through experience and integration. You didn't inherit privilege. You inherited adaptability. You didn't inherit certainty. You inherited the ability to stand in uncertainty without collapsing. And that ability changes everything, because when you can stand steady in the unknown starts working with you instead of against you. The world doesn't test you the same way anymore, not because tests stop coming, but because you stop being shaken by them. You move through challenges with a sense of inevitability, not arrogance, but trust in your own capacity. That trust is what others feel when they're around you. It's what makes them hesitate before underestimating you again. It's what makes influence drain from spaces that once relied on your doubt. You've become someone who doesn't need to be managed, and systems built on management struggle with that, so they adapt or they fall away. Either way, you keep moving, not chasing validation, not outrunning fear, just aligning action with truth. The emergency meeting fades into memory. The warnings turn into quiet acceptance. The pressure transforms into space, and in that space, you build not loudly, not defensively, deliberately. You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you survived. You don't need to narrate your growth. You don't need permission to continue becoming. You already are. This isn't the climax. It's the settling. The moment where effort gives way to momentum, where survival evolves into direction, where endurance becomes vision. You don't need to look back. The past already did its work. You stand now as proof of something simple and difficult to accept. That real power isn't taken, announced, or enforced. It's remembered, and once remembered, it can't be forgotten again. That's what they finally understood in that meeting. And that's why everything after feels different, not because the world changed, because you did.